They were about to throw her among dead cattle and flies, until a rider said, "Try, and I'll burn your barn." In a stretch of land so forsaken no map dared name it, death lingered like a house guest who'd long overstayed. They called it the Hollow of Silent Briar, a basin sunk deep between lifeless hills where the sun, come noon, seemed to turn away in shame. The earth there gave nothing good. The air stank of sour rot and still water. Trees leaned like old drunkards, their limbs brittle and gray, stripped of leaves years before. Even the crows had abandoned the place. Once a small trading post, it had since turned into something less, a crooked, broken scatter of clapboard homes and a church with a missing bell. Now, the hollow existed in whispers, the sort of place a passing rider might glimpse and spur his horse to avoid before dusk set in. And ruling over it all was Tobias Grint. Grint owned the land, the cattle, the barns, the grain store. The sheriff's badge hung on a nail in his office, and the preacher's sermons were tailored to his liking. Folks didn't call him Mister. They called him Sir, if they spoke to him at all. His word was law, his whims a matter of life and death. And death, here, was never far behind. This day, it arrived wearing the face of a frail, mud-caked girl. Her name was Elzie May, a wild thing, more bone than flesh, hair tangled in clumps, skin like faded parchment. Folks said she was touched by the fever years back, lost her wits in the burning season when the air shimmered and people dropped like flies. She hadn't spoken since, living more like a stray than a girl. They called her Elzie the Mute, though no one knew for certain if the fever or the grief took her voice. The cattle started dying a week before, bloated and stiff, eyes glassy, tongues hanging. Then the children began coughing, and old man Ridgway buried his wife under the sycamore tree. Folks muttered about curses, about bad blood, about the sins of the hollow, catching up with them at last. And Grint, with a voice like a breaking tree limb, pointed his thick finger at Elzie. "She cursed my herd," he declared, "and God knows what else she's done. She don't belong with decent folk." No one argued, not even the preacher. So it came to this, a gathering in the barnyard, where the carcasses of dead cattle lay stacked like cordwood, flies a black cloud above them. The air was thick with the stench of death and old blood. Men stood in a loose ring, eyes down, too afraid to object and too ashamed not to watch. Mothers held their children tight, small hands clutching worn aprons. Elzie May stood barefoot in the muck, wrists bound with old hemp rope. Her eyes were strange things, pale blue and empty as a winter sky. Mud clung to her cheeks, her dress little more than rags. "Let it be done," said the preacher, his voice quivering as he held the good book in one hand and wiped sweat from his brow with the other. A pair of Grint's men, ugly brutes with crooked teeth and cruel smiles, grabbed her by the arms. One of them, Harlan Pike, grinned wide as he wound her hair around his fist. "Reckon she'll scream now," he jeered. No one laughed. They began dragging her toward the pit behind the barn where the dead cattle lay. The sun, hidden behind gray clouds, cast no warmth. The only sound was the buzzing of flies and the shuffle of unwilling feet in the dirt. And then a sound, a horse's hooves on the dry, cracked earth. Heads turned as a lone rider appeared from the dust-hollowed path that led out from the ridgeline. His approach was unhurried, steady as the ticking of a death-watch clock. He sat tall in the saddle, a weather-stained hat pulled low, a long coat the color of ash draped around him. The horse beneath him was a mean, coal-colored thing, muscle and menace, eyes like burning coals. The townsfolk parted without a word as the rider reached the edge of the gathering. He reined in his mount, the leather creaking in the silence. No one spoke. He looked at them, or rather, they felt him look at them, from beneath the brim of that battered hat, a presence thick as storm air before a lightning strike. Harlan Pike, still holding Elzie by the hair, spat to one side. "Ain't your affair, stranger?" The rider's voice came slow, deep, and cold as river ice. "Try, and I'll burn your barn." The words fell into the still air like iron chains into water. For a long moment, no one moved. It was as though the very ground held its breath. The preacher clutched his book tighter. Mothers drew children behind their skirts. Even the flies seemed to falter. Harlan's grin twitched, faltered. He let go of Elzie's hair, and she crumpled to her knees in the dirt. Grint stepped forward then, red-faced, mustache bristling, sweat darkening the collar of his broadcloth coat. "Who the hell are you to ride into my yard, threaten my man, and meddle in my justice?" The rider didn't answer, didn't move. But something in the air changed, like the scent before rain. "You deaf, stranger?" Grint barked. "Speak your name, or be done." But the rider only touched the brim of his hat, tipping it forward, shadowing his face even more. And somehow, that was answer enough. The gathered crowd, those bent-back men and hollow-eyed women of Silent Briar, felt something then. An old fear. A recognition born not of sight, but of story. Of whispered campfire tales and dark warnings, passed down by those who'd seen too much in their years on the range. Because though none could see the rider's face, the air itself seemed to recoil at his voice. And deep down they all knew. Death had ridden in with a name none dared speak aloud. For a long time after those 6 words fell from the stranger's mouth. "Try, and I'll burn your barn." No one in Silent Briar moved. It wasn't the threat that held them still. It was the weight of the voice, like a stone dropped into a deep, forgotten well. A voice not used to making idle threats. The rider sat his pale black horse, like a man welded to the saddle, neither shifting nor blinking, the wide brim of his hat shadowing a face few dared look upon. And yet, as the dust curled about the yard, it wasn't long before uneasy recognition flickered behind weathered eyes. Tobias Grint's mouth worked soundlessly for a beat. Then he growled through clenched teeth. "Ain't possible." A small ripple of murmurs passed through the onlookers. Mothers clutched children tighter. Old men spat without aim. It wasn't what the rider had done. It was who he might be. The name rose, unspoken but thick in the air like wood smoke. Ash Fallon. Trail songs spoke of him. Old, half-remembered things sung around dying fires when the whiskey bit sharp. A man said to have perished years ago in a place where no good man ever went, Cold Noon Gulch. He was a name children dared each other to whisper at night, and drifters claimed to have seen long after his grave was filled. But here he was, astride an unbranded pale black horse no man had ever tried to steal, for it was said those who touched it uninvited were found days later with dirt in their mouths and eyes wide open. "Who the hell are you?" Harlan Pike called, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The stranger's gloved hand slipped to the butt of a battered revolver, holstered low on his hip. The gesture was slow, unhurried, not a threat, a promise. The horse stamped once, and the yard seemed to still again. "I'll be taking the girl," the rider said, voice like dry thunder. Grint's face twisted in fury. "You got no claim. She's poison, brought sickness on this hollow, ruined my stock." No answer came. The townsfolk, caught between the devil they knew and the one they feared, shifted uncomfortably. Eyes darted to one another, weighing the chances of who would live, who would die, and who would carry guilt for doing nothing. "You're a dead man walking if you cross me." Grint spat. "I've been dead a long time," the rider replied. That did it. A sound like a collective exhale swept through the gathered folk. They knew now. And so did Grint. He tried to laugh, a brittle, humorless bark. "Fallon," he said low, like the name tasted bad in his mouth. "I seen you hang. I seen them fill your grave." "I clawed out," Fallon replied. Then his revolver came up, steady as sunrise, and pointed not at Grint but at the rope binding Elzie May's wrists. A shot cracked, sharp and sudden. The rope fell in two, frayed and swaying. The girl crumpled again, weak but free. "Bring her here," Fallon commanded. No one moved. A second shot hit the dirt between Harlan's boots. He flinched, eyes wide as a spook mule. Now, it was the preacher, trembling so badly he near dropped his good book, who finally stepped forward. He bent, lifted the ragged girl gently, and brought her to the rider's side. "Mercy," the preacher murmured, though whether to Fallon the girl, or the Lord above, none could say. Ash Fallon reached down, gripped Elzie by the shoulder, and with surprising ease pulled her onto the saddle before him. She clung to him weakly, too spent to resist. "You best ride on," Grint snarled. "I'll be staying a while," Fallon said. The crowd parted again as Fallon nudged the pale black horse forward, through them, toward the ruins of the old church at the edge of the hollow. The building had long since fallen to ruin, its bell lost, its steeple crooked, like a broken finger pointing at the heavens. No one went near it. Superstition mostly, and the fact it hadn't rung since the day of the sickness. Villagers watched him go, none daring to follow. Their gazes flicked between Grint, pale with fury, and the preacher, who made the sign of the cross with a shaky hand. The bell tower was a hollowed husk of weathered beams and crumbling stone. Inside it smelled of mildew and old dust. Fallon laid the girl down on a tattered blanket of burlap and knelt beside her. She watched him, wary, a creature used to cruelty. Her hair was a tangled curtain, face smudged and bruised. "You speak?" he asked. She said nothing. He drew a small canteen, pressed it to her lips. She drank, coughing on the water. "I need to know," he said quietly. "What did you see?" Her throat worked. Eyes like frostbitten skies flickered toward the barnyard, then back to him. "No one's hurting you no more," he added. For a long moment, the only sound was wind rattling loose boards. Then, in a voice raw and thin as a reed, she rasped, "He's killing us all, mister." Fallon leaned closer. "Grint." She gave a brittle nod. Fallon's jaw clenched. "How?" Her lips cracked as she spoke. "The well. He put something in the water. Killed the cows. Made folks sick. Said it'd drive folks off. Leave him the land." Fallon's eyes darkened. He looked away for a long time, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts. "I seen men poison wells before," he murmured, more to himself than her. "Back in the Valley War. Way out past Red Moon Pass. Thought I'd put that kind of evil in the ground." Elzie blinked up at him. "You Ash Fallon?" He didn't answer. Didn't have to. Her small, raw hand reached toward him, touched the iron star pinned beneath his coat. A relic, old, tarnished, and long stripped of authority. But the badge meant something, even now. A symbol of who he'd been before Cold Noon Gulch, before fire and blood, and the things he did to make a dying land safe. "I remember," she said faintly. "My papa used to say you were a monster who hunted worse monsters." Fallon stared out through the empty window of the bell tower to the gray horizon beyond. "I was." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elzie's pale lips quirked in something too thin to be called a smile. "We need a monster now." The wind howled through the hollow like a mourning woman. Fallon rose, adjusting the battered revolver at his side. "You rest," he said. And outside, in the half-abandoned town of Silent Briar, the people began to whisper the name Ash Fallon once again, the name they thought buried in Cold Noon Gulch beneath ash and bones. But legends, like the men who wear them, have a way of clawing out of graves. Night fell like a burial cloth over Silent Briar. A slow, oppressive darkness settled into every crooked alley and hollowed barn, seeping into the bones of the place like rot. The rain came next, a thin, needling drizzle that gathered in the dips of the earth and streaked down the sagging church walls in greasy rivulets. In the bell tower's half-collapsed loft, Ash Fallon sat against a splintered beam, cleaning the blade of a weathered skinning knife with a scrap of oilcloth. Below, Elzie May lay wrapped in an old horse blanket, her thin shoulders rising and falling in shallow sleep. Even in rest, the girl flinched at every gust of wind. Fallon didn't blame her. He'd seen worse men than Grint in his years, but not many. The truth of Tobias Grint's plan had come out slow, drawn from the girl in halting, broken words between swigs of water and muffled sobs. It wasn't sickness that had cursed the cattle, nor was it any fever sweeping through town. It was oil, raw, black crude seeping up from the earth's veins, valuable to men back east, but death to land and beast alike if bled wrong. Grint had found it months ago. He'd poisoned the wells, let the cattle drink from fouled water, and watched as folk grew sick or fled. The plan was simple: drive out the settlers too poor or stubborn to sell, claim their deeds by default, and sell the valley's hidden oil seeps to distant buyers for a fortune. And he hadn't worked alone. The town council, what was left of it, had been bought. The preacher, a gaunt, simpering man named Calloway, traded his sermons for a promise of land. The sheriff, a thick-necked drunk called Harrow, had turned a blind eye for gold. Even the blacksmith and grain dealer knew parts of it, though none had the stomach to act. The hollow wasn't cursed by God, Fallon reckoned. It was damned by greed, and now they were coming for him. He heard them first, the faint scrape of boots on wet timber, the click of a hammer drawn back. Fallon smiled. The rain intensified, fat drops pattering against the shingles. Thunder rumbled somewhere out beyond the ridgeline. Ash pushed to his feet, checked the load in his Colt Lightning, a worn but wicked repeating pistol, and sheathed his knife. The first man came through the busted doorway with a lantern held high, a scattergun tucked beneath one arm. Another followed, then a third. All wore dark slickers and wide-brimmed hats drooping with rain. "Fallon," one of them called in a low voice, "ain't no point in running. Grint's got a good price for your head, and double for the girl." Ash stepped from the shadows. The flickering lantern light caught the pale scar along his cheek. "Price ought to be higher," he said, and shot the man through the eye. The scattergunner's body dropped, lantern shattering beside him, oil spilling like spilled blood. The other two cursed and dove for cover. Thunder cracked. Fallon moved fast, knife in one hand, revolver in the other. A bullet tore past his ear. He answered with two of his own, one catching a man in the thigh. The wounded attacker howled, tumbling through a stack of rotted hymnals. Another came at him with a machete, face twisted in hate. Ash ducked a swing and drove his knife up, catching the man beneath the ribs. A quick, wet sound and the man dropped. "Ash!" a thin, ragged voice cried. Elzie, a man Fallon hadn't seen, had come through the loft window, grabbing her by the arm, yanking her upright. His teeth gleamed in the dim light, a knife at her throat. "Drop it, Fallon," the man snarled. Ash did no such thing. His pistol came up fast. But Elzie moved faster. Somehow, Fallon would remember it forever. She reached out, grabbed a half-full oil lantern from the floor, and hurled it straight into the attacker's face. It struck glass first. Flames burst in a hungry whoosh. The man screamed, clawing at his burning face, stumbled backward, and tumbled out the broken window into the storm. Elzie slumped against the wall, breathing hard. Ash crossed to her, crouched, grabbed her face gently. "You all right?" She nodded, though her face was bloodless. Fallon stood, checked the room. 3 dead. 1 burning in the yard. The 4th had crawled off, leaving a crimson trail behind. Rain hissed through holes in the roof. The girl's eyes stayed wide, locked on him. You were in Cold Noon Gulch," she said. Fallon didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the rising smoke outside. "I was," he said finally. "Long time back. They say you burned it, women and all." "I did," Ash said, voice rough as unworked stone. "There was a sickness in that town, one that left no one alive. Fever worse than any man's seen. Black boils, blood in the lungs. I tried to save him. Some made it out. Most didn't. Orders came down. They wanted it contained. So you set the fire." "I set the fire." Elzie's lips quivered. "And they called you Ash Hands." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Some still do." She dug something from her ragged dress then, a small, rusted object. She held it out in her dirt-streaked palm. "I was waiting for the right man to give this to," she said. It was a marshal's badge. The star faded, edges nicked, back bent from wear. The kind handed down in towns too small for real law. Fallon took it, fingers closing around the metal. "My paws," Elzie whispered. "He was foreman under Grint before he found out what Grint was doing. He tried to stop it. They shot him, left him in the well, took his badge and told the town he run off." Ash stared at the badge a long moment, the rain hissing through the rafters. "Your father was a lawman?" Elzie nodded. "Not by name, but by heart." Fallon turned the badge over in his hand, feeling the weight of it, remembering a time before he became a ghost in trail songs. A time before Cold Noon Gulch. "Ash," Elzie said softly. He looked up. "We can't leave it like this." "No," he agreed. For the first time, the rain seemed to lessen. The hollow was still waiting. Ash turned toward the smoldering body outside the window, the flickering firelight illuminating his weathered face. In his hand, the badge gleamed. "One last fire," he muttered. And outside, in the dying storm, the people of Silent Briar whispered his name again, not with fear this time, but with a flicker of impossible, dangerous hope. Dawn bled slow over Silent Briar, a dull gray smudge where light met mist. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind thick, hanging air heavy with the stink of wet earth, old blood, and something sour and oily. The town square, a patch of churned mud and broken boards, had filled with every living soul left in the hollow. They gathered by instinct, folks who'd spent their lives keeping heads down, drawn now by the scent of reckoning. Ash Fallon stood alone. His coat clung to his shoulders, spattered with rain, blood, and soot. The battered revolver at his hip hung low, loose in its worn holster. Beside him, Elzie May, bruised but unbowed, clutched the rusted marshal's badge in her small fist, her face streaked with grime and defiance. Across the square, Tobias Grint emerged from the crowd. His fine coat hung open, a thick revolver stuffed in his belt. His face was mottled red, hair slicked back with sweat. At his side, the sheriff, a lumbering ox of a man, cradled a Winchester. Grint raised his arms like a preacher addressing his flock. "There stands your death," Grint bellowed, voice carrying sharp and clear in the morning hush. "Ash Fallon, a murderer, a butcher of women and children at Cold Noon Gulch, the man cursed by his own crimes, now come to poison this hollow with his fire and his lies." Murmurs rippled through the townsfolk. Fear, doubt, names like Fallon's didn't fade easy. Ash stepped forward. "You'd know about butchery, wouldn't you, Grint?" His voice was ragged, cold. "Poisoning your own wells, killing your own men, selling out this land for oil." Grint barked a short laugh. "You call me a liar, boy? After what you done? Ask the sheriff." Sheriff Harrow cleared his throat. "Ain't no place for you here, Fallon. Law says you should 'a' hung years ago." Ash's hand twitched toward his gun. The sheriff grinned, raising his rifle. "Let's finish it now." And then everything shattered. A savage crack of gunfire split the square. Ash's revolver cleared leather in a blur, the first bullet catching the sheriff high in the chest. The big man staggered, mouth opening, blood blooming like dark paint across his shirt. He dropped hard, his rifle clattering in the mud. A deputy dove for cover. Too slow. Fallon's second shot punched clean through his throat. Chaos erupted. Grint's men fired wildly, townsfolk scattering. Mothers screamed, dragging children toward doorways. The preacher ducked behind a horse trough. Ash moved like a storm wind, his repeating colt barking fire and death. A third deputy went down with a hole in his temple. Another tried to run. Ash's bullet struck him in the spine, dropping him like a sack of grain. The fight lasted seconds, a frantic, brutal staccato of sound and smoke. When the gunsmoke cleared, Fallon stood alone, his chest heaving, gun hand steady. And Grint was gone. "Where is he?" Fallon growled. A child pointed, voice trembling. "The barn he took Elzie." Ash's stomach turned cold. The barn sat at the far end of the yard, sagging under its own weight. Smoke still hung in its rafters from the night before. The carcasses of dead cattle lay in bloated heaps nearby, flies a thick, buzzing cloud. Ash pushed through the doors. Inside was dark, thick with stench. Oil drums lined the walls, their contents seeping into the soil in black, viscous streams. Dead cattle rotted in the gloom. And there, at the far end, Grint held Elzie, one arm clamped tight around her throat, a pistol pressed against her temple. "Don't take another step," Grint spat. Ash didn't raise his gun. "You always were a coward, Grint," he said. "Back at Cold Noon, you led those raiders to the post, took their gold, sold out the soldiers, your own men, while you rode off with the loot, and let him burn." Grint's face twisted, recognition flickering. "You should have died there." "I didn't," Fallon said, stepping closer. "I made a life out of what you left behind." Grint sneered. "This land, this town, I built it." Ash's eyes narrowed. "You poisoned it." For a moment neither moved. Then Ash spotted it, a rusted, soot-darkened lantern hanging on a nail by the wall. Its glass cracked, oil sloshing inside. He shifted his gaze to Elzie, her wide eyes locked on his. Slowly, Ash pulled the lantern from the nail, held it out toward her. "No law left here but yours now, girl," he said, voice low. "You choose." Grint snarled. "Don't you?" But Elzie's hand shot out. She grabbed the lantern. For a heartbeat, the barn hung silent. Then she hurled it. The lantern shattered at Grint's feet, oil splashing up his legs. Fire roared to life, greedy and fast. Flames climbed his clothes, hungrily catching dry hay, spilled oil, and rotting wood. Grint screamed. Elzie stumbled back as the blaze consumed him, his face a mask of horror as fire took hold. The cattle's bloated corpses ignited, and thick black smoke billowed toward the rafters. Ash grabbed Elzie's hand, pulling her toward the doors as the barn became a roaring inferno. They burst outside, the morning now painted orange with flame. The townsfolk watched from a distance, faces pale in the flickering light. No one spoke. No one moved. The fire devoured the barn, climbing higher, exposing oil-soaked earth and leaking drums beneath the floor. The truth of Grint's sins now blazed in the open. Ash turned, the fire reflecting in his scarred face. And for the first time, the people of Silent Briar saw him without doubt. Not a ghost, not a story, but a man of flesh, blood, and fury. Ash Fallon. Somewhere in the crowd, a man murmured the name. Then another, and another. A name both curse and legend, now etched in firelight. Ash looked down at Elzie. "It's over." She squeezed his hand, her face streaked with ash and tears, but her eyes steady. For now. They turned and walked into the dawn as the barn collapsed behind them, a roaring pyre. The ground hissed as buried oil caught fire, sending dark plumes toward the gray sky. And the hollow, long cursed by the sins of men, finally began to burn clean. The smoke hung low over Silent Briar, thick and greasy as it clung to the scorched husk of the barn. Dawn pressed feebly against it, a tired light filtering through charred rafters and the blackened skeletons of dead trees. The townsfolk gathered in scattered knots, unsure whether to grieve, rebuild, or run. Tobias Grint was gone, burned to cinders in the very barn where his greed had festered. His men either dead, vanished into the hills, or too frightened to face what remained. The preacher Calloway stood before the crowd in the square, sweat beading his brow. His hands trembled around the Bible he clutched, the edges stained with old, damp ink. I confess it," he stammered. "I knew. Grint, he paid me to preach lies, to blind you. I feared him, same as you." Nobody spoke. Calloway's voice cracked. I'll be leaving. The Lord's house has no room for cowards." And with that, he dropped his book and fled, his long coat flapping behind him like a desperate crow. Ash Fallon watched it all from the edge of the square, leaning against the skeletal remains of the old church. The battered bell, half buried in weeds, still bore scorch marks from the night the town lost its voice. In his hand, Ash held a small, rusted thing, a star-shaped badge dulled by age and grief. He knelt in the cold mud and dug a shallow hole beneath the bell with the edge of his knife. Carefully, he placed Elzie's father's badge inside and covered it with a palmful of earth. "For what it was worth," he murmured. Footsteps scuffed the ground behind him. An old townsman, Barrow, one of the last councilmen, stepped forward, a new, polished badge in his gnarled hand. "Town's got no law left, Fallon," Barrow rasped. "We've lost too many good folk. Place needs a steady hand. Someone with your name, your reputation." Ash didn't turn. "I ain't ever been law. I've been fire. That's all I know how to be." Barrow hesitated, then dropped the badge at Ash's feet and left. By the time Ash rose, the townsfolk were already turning inward, some boarding windows, others hauling water, quietly deciding how, or if, Silent Briar would live through another season. Ash made for his pale black horse, cinching the saddle and testing the girth strap. Elzie appeared at his side, hair tangled, face smeared with soot but her eyes steady. "Where you headed?" she asked. "East, maybe. Or north. Wherever the ground ain't turned sour." "You'll die out there alone." He gave a rough, humorless grin. "Wouldn't be the first time." "I'm coming with you," she said flatly. Ash squinted down at her. "Girl." "I ain't a girl," she cut in. 17 come last harvest. Look it if you want. Grint starved me near to death after my pa found those oil drums. For a moment, Ash studied her face, the high-boned features beneath the grime, the fierce resolve in her sunken eyes. She wasn't a child anymore. She never had been. You ride hard, he asked. Faster than you, she said. He gave a short nod, helped her into the second saddle. They rode out of Silent Briar without ceremony, past the smoking barn and the empty post road. The horizon stretched ahead, like a promise neither of them entirely believed. Miles out, as the sun climbed higher and the scent of ash finally fell away, Elzie reached into Fallon's saddlebag for a strip of dried meat. Instead, her fingers brushed stiff paper. She drew it out, unfolded the brittle parchment, and read the faded ink. The words chilled her blood. Death warrant. For Ash Fallon, known also as Ash Hands. Crime. Mass execution and arson of Cold Noon Gulch Outpost. Sentence. Execution by hanging. Signed Marshall R. E. Cutter. The paper shook in her hands. The edges were singed. It bore the red wax seal of a federal authority long dead. Ash Fallon wasn't just a legend. He was a condemned man. A fugitive. Not a wayward lawman. Not a ghost hunting worse devils. He was the outlaw hunter turned outlaw himself. And no one had ever caught him. Elzie looked ahead at the man riding silently before her. His broad shoulders. The way he tilted his hat against the sun. And then she looked down at the letter. A long moment passed. Then she struck a match from the saddlebag's pocket, held it to the edge of the paper, and let the flame catch. The warrant curled, blackened, and drifted into ash. She scattered the ashes to the wind. Some sins, she reckoned, were meant to die in the dirt. Whatever Ash Fallon had been, whatever blood he'd spilled, he was the man who'd burned the poison from Silent Briar. She wiped her hands clean of soot and rode on. And in time, folks would say the hollow healed. New grass grew where the oil had soured the land, and the well water ran clean again. Babies were born healthy, and the church bell was hoisted back into its place. But in every town, in every saloon corner, old men would tell stories of the pale horse and the man in the ash-gray coat. How he came, how he fought, and how he vanished. And some say the hollow healed after that, but others swear it only ever traded one ghost for another.